Good morning everybody and welcome back into building Hyrule Castle in Lego in minifigure scale, and for 1 week I've actually decided to stick with the project, and that is the docks here, which is actually now looking fairly complete, at least from this side. And I think that this really starts to show the scale of the castle. If this is just the docks, imagine what the whole thing's going to look like. And obviously a lot of this was here last week, however there have been a great deal of improvements made since then, most noticeably over here on the right hand side where we've got a whole new plate layout. But first let's finish up with those details and changes that I was making last week. Firstly, there was this wall segment here which I decided I was going to build slightly differently than the rest of the rock work to try and get this brown pattern of like girders and stuff included into the MOC. In the end I decided to go with a snot technique, which was interesting to say the least, which is using a load of these brickhead pieces supported by some Technic beams around the back. I'll explain more of that later. And then that allowed me to build a snot wall using all of these white ones and then give all these grey things. It might need some modification in the future if it looks a bit on the weird side, however we'll judge it as it goes. It's basically just like a wibbly wobbly like pattern to make it look like there are girders in the wall, and then it straightens off towards the end. I also used a bit of a weird technique on the wall behind here. If you remember last time we had built our little archway thing, but I hadn't connected it in, and that is all done now. Once again we're using a couple of snot techniques around the back here, such as putting like tiles and plates together to blend in with these slopes, but then it is also changing back to... Oh no, this is all snot. I forgot about that part. This is all still snot to bring up the archway. If I just zoom in here to try and get right in the corner, you can see that just like before it's snot, it changes angle and then it continues coming on up the stairs, which creates a really nice effect if I line this up to like pretend to walk down the stairs. If we just go down here, it sort of looks all cut tunnely, and this is an angle that I suppose you won't really see too much, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. Let's zoom out again, just to give you another look at the back though. You can see we've got some more pillars, obviously, before we move into the new area. Other stuff I finished up though from last week was the big pillar. I said that this rock pillar was present in Breath of the Wild, and what I did this time was I took it up from that base layer and I just sort of worked with it now that I know the rough height of the model. And then of course everything else was moving east. Okay, so the first thing I did was I obviously had to work out what was going to happen with our brazier. We also had this stair piece in last time, but I had to work out the angles. It just so happened the angles I was going to work with was that of the wedge plates, and it actually benefited me that this is actually on grid. If we look at where our studs are, you can see that this is actually lined up, which is awesome. Just down here you can see how I've done it, so it's a bit of a normal plate build. You build upwards, 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 but here on the sideways you've got a bit of a snot work just to sort of blend it in. I really like how this looks with like getting this square pattern with all the things and this like raised out light bluish grey, and then the insetted dark grey. We've also got the first representation of some larger scale flags, which I know look a bit awkward, but I'm working on it. I think perhaps maybe the dark red colour would work a lot better for them now that all those pieces are available in dark red. Oh yeah, that definitely is an improvement. So that's an interesting one. And we also have this pentagonal tile in the middle, which would be a Hylian shield crest. Looking at some of the other details, in order to hide the angles as best as possible, I have included these Erling bricks, which create a nice texture when we attach cheese slopes to the side to minimise the gap between this 45-degree angle. You can also see that the brickwork works really well as like indented texture. In particular with like this one here where you've got this light greyish window and then the dark bluish grey, which is sort of recessed at the back, and I've tried to replicate as many of the main shapes as possible. If I bring up an image on the screen, you can see actually how it does curve inwards to form the archway, which I think is an interesting thing. I think it works really well. Moving up to the top, we also have a couple more details up here, such as the balustrades, which are continuing the design from last week, where they go across in the same pattern, except for these ones curve all the way around the hexagonal outprusion. So far, I haven't actually decorated particularly up here. We've sort of got a rough plan of what's going on, but I'll leave that for future explanations. To start with though, it's very clear we've got our brazier here, which is what you light to make the shrine appear. I'm using one of the big grey light buckets which appeared in the Star Destroyer and also some other sets, and to make sort of the embers I've used the black robot arms to look a bit like charcoal, all around a central base piece and then having a flame come out of the top. Over towards the back, I've tried to do some techniques for some terrain layering. We've got some curved slopey bits to sort of make it look like they've dug up to this point. So it's just a bit like a roadie. It looks a bit more slippery than a lot of the other cave work, which I think is nice. And you've got the beginning of the staircase, or at least what I hope to be the staircase. However, I was going to go this way and continue the project. However, I can't do that because I just have no idea where the library is going to be in comparison. So we'll have to work that out before we can do that. Up here though, you can just see some more angle work to try and get us back on grid for the base plate, as actually, while you might think that this is actually the on grid because of how it's built, it's not, which takes us around to the back. The back is all built in pink, which allows me to set it as undefined colours in Bricklink, and you can see here that there are a lot of pillars with some turntables on the top set to 45-degree angles, which mean that we're allowed to do a 45-degree angle build such as this. Up here the rockwork is a little bit smaller because we're a bit closer to the top. This area won't be as large, probably only coming up to that plate layer in the final version. I think that's probably where I'll stop it. And there's obviously some more detail up here to have added like some crates. I don't think I'll be adding the shrine because as I said, we're going pre-calamity, but that's pretty much it for like what I've actually added. It's interesting that from an angle for viewing points, we could also show you it from this cave angle here, which is a very difficult and complex angle to get as I'm changing back 45 degrees on the fly. Definitely gets easier once we get up to this point, but I really love the rock work and how it sort of curves down and actually makes it look like the landscape is curving. Back over the other side, nothing's really changed. However, this is where I want to work today. There's one last plate I want to get done, and I want to build the flame blade. And that is mostly so that we can actually get that iconic angle, or at least I think it's iconic, where we stand up by the brazier and we look across and we see a flame blade just about here. So let's go over to what I've constructed so far and take a look at the F0 template. Okay, so here is the F0 template, and we're going to be keeping this one separate for a little bit. Eventually I will be adding it to the main docs file so that you guys will get to see it together, but today was all about designing the flame blade platform and that sort of area. Now I did actually want to do a little bit more progress for you guys, but I got to the point where I needed to make the actual flame blade, and it took a while because I actually custom made this piece in the parts designer program that runs with Studio, allowing me to sort of replicate what that little flame piece looks like. Now the idea for this is the same as in my Yiga Clan Attacks custom set, where the flame piece is actually one of those ones from the little superheroes accessory pack, which has a bar connection at either end, allowing it to sit into the ground and sort of look like a flaming sword. It doesn't exactly look like the flame blade from Zelda, however I think this is an iconic enough part of the castle that while it wasn't here probably before the Calamity, I think it's still working, it's definitely worthy of being included here. So the first thing to point out is this here. So this white pillar here is what I use as my height thing. So when I transferred from the other plate, the first thing I did was I made a little capper which goes down from the base plate layer all the way up, and this shows me how high the build needs to be to connect perfectly with the one on the left. If the terrain levels are a bit more complicated, such as if they go up and down, then I'll actually build the first part of it next to each other just so that we can see it better. However, I didn't have to do this for this one, and we'll be lining this up in subsequent weeks. For simplicity's sake, I did actually fill in this thing with hollow pink bricks just to give it some nice support, and of course we've got our normal rockwork technique made up of ups and downs of slopes all the way around here, because obviously this is the curve which will then hopefully lead off to outside the cave this way, and we'll have a cave wall eventually here. The reason that this plate is not just considered done is because the rest of this plate is actually going to have stuff on. There should be a wall which leads to the exit of the cave, which just goes along here. However, I did not have the time to work out where that's going to go today, and actually I think we'll work around from the other end, because then at least we know how big we want the cave to be. As for other details for this plate, we've obviously got the flame blade plinth, which I should say is at an angle. It's just built using a snot technique with some slopes at either end, making it look like a plinth for it to stick into, just like the one in game. I did a unreasonable amount of research for that, and because it's actually quite a mossy area, but because we're in a cave and there's not much light, instead of going for the normal bright green we're going to be using in the rest of the castle, I've decided to use our mossy sand greens and olive green colours to create a sort of more licheny overgrown effect. The last thing you might be wondering around is this black layer. This is just the layer I am using as a temporary placement underneath the water of the castle, meaning that we can vary the textures and stuff if we want to later on. And this red dot just shows me the orientation in comparison to the docks. So this shows me which way the back of the castle is pointing, just in case I ever forget how this module connects to all of the others, which I think is an important thing to establish early on. But that is going to be it for today. That is all I've been working on with the castle. We'll go back to the docs file and then we'll wrap up for the day. And that is gonna do it for week 4 of building Hyrule Castle. And I can't quite decide whether to call this a weekly series or not, because obviously I know we're running bi-weekly at the moment. However, I think I did a lot today, and while it didn't necessarily translate into a long video, I definitely think it shows that I put a lot of effort into what we've done so far. And the docks are done. Like, the whole cave might not be done, but the actual segment where you can walk is done. We've got all of the iconic details, and I'm so happy with how it turned out at this scale. It just looks so good. I'm really pleased with it. I'm a bit scared of what's to come. It's going to be a really, really big project, but I definitely think it's worth it. If every room is just as cool as this, I cannot wait to start. As for next week, I think we'll start working on the outside, or maybe we'll do the other side of the cave next. We'll have to wait and see what I decide to do. But in the meantime, let me know what you thought of our progress this week, if there are any details you missed, and what rooms you're most excited for in the castle, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.